When you're working with a blog post or page, I want the content to only take up sort of the middle 800 pixels or so. So how do we customize this? How do we change this? Well, that's where theme.json comes into play. So in our brand new empty theme.json file, let's add curly brackets. Inside there, let's add a property called version. Set it to 2. In the future, I'm sure this will get bumped up to version 3, version 4, but as I'm recording this in the early middle portion of 2022, this is the current number. The reason we need this is because the block editor is changing so much, so quickly, and so drastically that WordPress really needs some sort of version system in order for everything to not just break and be super confusing, right? WordPress is currently in the process of changing so many different settings and the way that the block editor works and the way that full site editing works. So it makes sense that you would need to specify a version. Anyways, let's add another property called settings, curly brackets. Inside of that object, let's set a property called layout, curly brackets. Inside of that, we can have a property called content size, and the S in size is capitalized. And let's give this a value of 800 pixels. So as soon as we save this file and then go back into WordPress, if you refresh your blog post or page editor, cool, let me zoom in. You can measure if you want to, but it's only taking up, you can see the content is using the middle 800 pixels. But if we go to the full site editor and refresh, it will continue to use the full available width. And it's just personal preference, but this is the way that I like to configure things. If you're curious, as of today, I believe WordPress uses a value of 840 as the default sort of standard fallback value. Cool, so we can give that a save, go back into the blog post screen, refresh, you get the idea. Now in just a minute or two, we will learn more about theme.json. For example, we'll learn how to define a color palette, provide default styles for WordPress core blocks, disable certain features, so on and so forth. But before we get to that, let's take a break from theme.json. And I want to talk about how you could make a block take up the available full width if you wanted to. So for example, I don't want paragraphs and headings and most blocks to take up the full width in the post or page editor. However, what if you inserted our banner block? So what if I added a block and I added the banner block? And what if I did indeed, even though we're in the post or page editor, what if I wanted it to take up the full available width? Well, here's what you can do. Jump into your text editor. Let's go into our blocks, jump into banner.js. When we're using register block type and we're providing properties like title, edit, and save, we can just add another property named supports, curly brackets. Be sure to include a comma after that. In the curly brackets, we can just say that we support the align property, give it an array, and the only option we want to give it is full. Then let's also set that to be the default choice before you even select it. So we would just give our block an attributes property, comma, in the curly brackets. Let's have a property named align, curly brackets. So its type would be a string of text, but most importantly, its default value should be full. So you don't even need to select it manually as the user. Let's give this a save and be sure to have your npm run start task up and running. Cool. So if I go back into WordPress and refresh, and keep in mind I'm in the post and page editor. If I refresh, well, I forgot to save the post with the banner, but if you just add in the banner block once again, cool. Now it is indeed taking up the full width. Okay, at this point, let's get back to the theme.json file. For example, let's learn how to use this file to define color palette starter values for our theme. So inside the settings object, so maybe right above the layout property, we can have a property called color, curly brackets, be sure to include a comma. Inside this object, there are many different properties we can set, but the first one I want to talk about is palette. So colon, and set this to an array, so square brackets. In the square brackets, we can just list multiple colors. So Each color is an object. To define a color, you give it a property called slug. So this is where you make up a name. Let's make up a name of maybe primary. That's our primary color, comma. Then you give it a property of color. And then this would be the actual color code, the hexadecimal value. So hashtag, I'm just going to use the primary blue from Fictional University. So it's hashtag 0D3B66. Okay, comma, and then you give it a property of name. And the idea here is the slug is sort of the computer-friendly name for your color. This is the human-friendly or human-readable name. So you could say uppercase primary or primary blue, but I'll just go with primary. Okay, and now in a palette, you would want more than one color, so you can just duplicate this object, have a comma, paste it in. I won't bore you with this, so I'm going to add in 3 additional colors, and then if you want to follow along, you can pause the video once I have them in. Okay, if you want to, you can pause the video and type these in. So primary is the blue color in Fictional University. Secondary is the orange color, and then I just have background and foreground. So this is white, and this is a sort of medium dark gray. You can also find this file as a downloadable zip at the end of the lesson for your reference. But let's go ahead and save this. And now back in the post editor, if we refresh, any block where you can customize the color, you're going to see those palette options now. So if I click on this paragraph and then use this icon to show the right-hand menu, you can go into the color menu. If you want to change the text color for this paragraph, click on that, and your theme palette colors show up there, right? There's the Fictional University blue, orange. There's the human readable label name when you hover over one. You get the idea. Let's take things a step further though, because yes, it's useful to have theme palette color options here, but I think it would be even better if we could define default values that specific blocks should use. So let me give you a real world example. Below this paragraph, let's imagine we add the default core buttons block, right? So WordPress has a block type called buttons, and then let's just say click me. So what if we wanted our theme.json file to say that by default, if you use the core WordPress button block, this background color of the button should be our Fictional University blue or Fictional University orange. Well, let's go set that up. Let's spell out that style within theme.json. So back in our text editor, if we scroll up to the top, so far everything we've been adding lives in the settings object. However, right now we can add another top level property called styles, colon, curly brackets, comma. Inside of this object, let's have a property called blocks, colon, curly brackets. In this object, you can now provide styles for specific blocks. Now, we're only going to write out one, so its name would be core/button, right? Colon, curly brackets. But the idea is you could have a comma here and then spell out styles for as many of the core blocks as you want to. We're just going to have this one, so we don't need the comma at the end. Now, in this object, let's drop down and let's have a property called color, colon, curly brackets. And now we'll have one property called text. And imagine we want the text color to be white, so hashtag, and then 3 Fs or 6 Fs, comma. But now let's set the background color. Now here's where things get interesting. Sure, you could hard code this to a color code value for blue or orange, but what if we want to point towards one of the colors from our palette? For example, let's imagine we want to use the primary blue color, so our primary palette color. You would just say in these quotes, var for variable, parentheses, and then it's --wp --preset --color and then whatever slug name you want to choose. So in our case, it would be primary. However, I want to make it clear that you're free to make up any names you want here. There was nothing special about the name primary. So just to prove a point here, I could change this slug name for our primary blue to be pizza. And then that's what you would reference here. So it would be --pizza. So you're free to make up slug names. WordPress will make them available as CSS variables like this. So let's give this a save and test it out. If we refresh the post edit screen where I'm editing this blog post, and if I try to insert the buttons block once again, so say buttons, there it is. Cool, notice the button is blue by default. We didn't have to set that. You say click me, and then we can go ahead and save this blog post. And WordPress, we can go ahead and view it on the front end as well. So WordPress is going to generate the CSS for us on both the admin editor side and the front end side. If you're curious how this works, you can right click on that button. So I'm on the front end of my website right now. Click inspect. There's the button, the A element. It has a class of WP button block link. And there you can see the actual CSS powering that. So from a technical perspective, it's just a CSS variable, but WordPress does the work of making those variables available on the front end and the admin side. So that allows us to sort of set these starter default values in theme.json, but the owner of the website is free to override them. So let's pretend we're not a web developer and we're just, the non-technical owner of the website. What you can do, if you go into the full site editor screen, right? So not the blog post editor, but the full site editor. You can go ahead and click attempt block recovery. That's not the point right now. When you have a block type that's a work in progress that you're continually writing new code for, you're going to see this message. Anyways, in the full site template editor, you can click on this icon. If you hover over it, it says styles. And now we can click on colors. Down here, you could set options like the entire background page color or, sort of the default body text color. I'm not interested in those settings. What I want to show you right now is the palette option right here. So if you click on palette, there are the colors we set up in our theme.json file. If you click the 3 arrows right above them, you can click edit colors. So now the owner of the website can say, you know what? I don't want primary to be this dark blue, so they can click on it and choose a neon green. Whether that's good or bad, that's not up for us to decide. Let's go ahead and save that. And now if you refresh, you can see your button. It's just going to use whatever the primary slug color has been set to. Now, I do want to point out that it's not as if our theme.json file got automatically updated. It's still claiming that the primary color is the dark blue. To really understand what's going on here, you can open up your database. Click onto the posts table, click select data, go to the very last page of results, scroll down to the very last item. Well, actually for me it's the second to last item, but you can see if I go into edit it to look at it, you can see post content. WordPress has saved the same content that would normally live in our theme.json file. It's saved that into the database. So you can see the settings that have actually been changed. So settings, color, palette, and that primary or pizza color, right? That is the custom value, the neon green. So this is very similar to the way that WordPress handles customizations to templates, right? It stores the user customizations in the database, and then the files on the actual hard drive, they always serve as sort of a way to get back, a home base that you can revert to. So for example, the non-web developer user could go into the styles, and then you can always click these 3 dots up here and just click reset to defaults. As soon as you do that, you see it's back to the values from theme.json. So you can click save, and now the button is no longer hideous neon green. It's back to the value that we chose as a professional. Okay, let's change gears now. So that's enough about this styles object. Let's get back to the settings object. I want to show you how you can set both global settings and per block settings. So let's walk through an example. Let's imagine, back on the blog post edit screen, let's imagine when you click on the core WordPress buttons block. Imagine we did not want there to be a border option in this right-hand menu. Right? So what if we just want to disable the border setting completely? Well, in theme.json, within our settings object, not styles, but settings, we can just add another property. So maybe above color, we can have a property called blocks, curly brackets, comma. As you might have guessed, you spell out which block you're interested in. So core/button, curly brackets. And now the thing we're interested in is not color, but it's border. Curly brackets. In this object, there's multiple border properties, and I just want to set all of them to false. So color, right? The color of the border, I want to set that to false. I don't want you to be able to set that. Same thing with the radius of the border. Same thing with the style of the border, right? Is it solid? Is it dotted? Set that to false. And finally, the width of the border. So we can save that. If we go back and refresh, if I click on that button, notice there is no longer any mention of border in the settings that we can customize. Okay, so that's a per block setting example. What if we wanted a global setting change? So what if for every single block, we wanted to disable the ability to change the color and maybe the typography or font size? Well, back in theme.json, within settings, but not within blocks, right? Blocks is where you set up specific settings for that particular block. So above the blocks line, but inside settings, we can have something called typography, colon, curly brackets, comma. In there, we can start saying, font sizes, and just set that to an empty array. If we give that a save and then refresh, now if I click on the button in the right-hand sidebar, we no longer see the option to change the font size. And actually, instead of walking through how you would disable this color menu, I think we need to talk about a larger point here. And you've probably been yelling at the screen for the last minute or two, wondering, Brad, how in the world am I supposed to know the names of these properties and the names of these options? That's a great question, and I think it actually brings us to the end of this lesson. And that is, working with this theme.json file, there's not really any educational concepts. What I mean by that is there are no ideas to explain. It's really just JSON property names and values, and I don't think there's really any value in memorizing everything here. It's more of a situation where you Google for the thing you're trying to accomplish, and you dig through the WordPress documentation to find what you need. So if you're wondering how I found out the names of these properties and what sort of values you're supposed to be giving them, well, if you just go to developer.wordpress.org, it's still early days for full site editing and theme.json. So the useful information is still spread out across multiple pages, but all I did was look around, and in the official documentation, you'll find examples of the property names, the different values that you can provide. So I encourage you to check out the documentation if there's something specific that you're trying to achieve. But it's not something that I would worry about, experimenting and studying preemptively if there's not something you really want to set up right here, right now. In fact, this ties into our very next lesson. So depending on the way that you're going to be using WordPress, you might use theme.json more or less. In other words, if you're going to use WordPress as a content management system, right, where you don't expect your clients to change the design of the website, you're probably not going to rely on this file all that much. If, however, you're going to use WordPress where the clients or the end users are indeed using WordPress as a page builder or a design builder, well, then you might want to study this file a bit more in depth. Anyways, in our next lesson, we're going to start building our custom button block type. So remember our banner block, we've already created generic heading. Now we're going to create generic button. And when we code the option to let the user choose what color the button should be, you'll actually see that I don't want to use theme.json. I want to code those color options myself in our custom block. The reason for this is because I don't want the end user to have any ability whatsoever to actually change the custom color values. And as of right now, I'm speaking at the end of February or the beginning of March 2022, I can't find an easy way to completely 100% lock down certain settings in this file so that the end user can't just override it. Now again, depending on the type of website you're building, maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. In other words, there's no one right or wrong way to handle all of these new technologies that we're covering. I'm just trying to show you a bird's eye view of the different technology pieces that exist, and it's really up to you to form your own opinion, your own philosophy of how you want to use these technologies. Anyways, that's enough rambling. In our next lesson, we're going to start building our custom button block. Let's keep things rolling, and I'll see you then.